Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Shelf Life. This is Simran, and this is my podcast, Shelf Life. We talk about books, their philosophies, but most importantly, our personal relationship with the book. It is a beautiful day here in Mumbai, and I hope that by the time you're watching this, you've had a wonderful week. You've had a productive, healthy, happy week. Hopefully, also had some growth inducing days and moments or any of that, but I hope you've had a good week. I personally have had a pretty interesting week. I think there's been some very intricate deliberations that have happened over the course of the week. I've been thinking a lot about just what the purpose is of a lot of things and why we go through some things and why we don't go through some things and others do. I've been thinking a lot about the meaning of certain moments in your life that you have to endure and certain things that you have to endure. And I've been thinking a lot about on the lines of, just what constitutes as right and wrong and what is the best way to respond to a situation. And sometimes, if that response is valid or not is not up to you to decide. So I don't know, it's been a lot of lofty ideas. I've had some nice conversations with friends and just people over the internet as well that I sometimes get to talk to, I sometimes hear from because of their opinions and all of that. I've just been thinking a lot about these things, and it's been very interesting getting to know how, honestly, that's what I was getting to. One of the most interesting things for me to note during this whole week was just how much I've changed from how I was, like maybe a year ago or 2 years ago, 3 years ago. It's so interesting to see that and to see it so clearly sometimes. A lot of the times, some of the views that I had on certain things or some strongly held beliefs that I had maybe have sort of just simmered down or quieted down over the years, and that's very interesting to see. I was in fact I was actually having a conversation last night with a friend who I hadn't spoken to for a while, and we were just sort of talking, and even they said that it's the lockdown itself that kind of made them a little bit more calmer in a sense, and this is someone I knew from college. So they were saying that in college she was extremely not in the moment per se, like she would just get through from one minute to another without really thinking about things and without really absorbing her surroundings. Even you just knew that these were things you had to do, these were places you had to go, you had to get up at 7 a.m. to catch a train, you had to come back home whenever you were done with your work or whatever, whenever you're done doing whatever you had to do, and that was just life. You took life with those things in mind, and you didn't really calculate a lot of things. And I agree, and with the lockdown and with everything that's happened over these couple of months, I have definitely cooled down a lot. I used to be a very hyper person very extreme, very bouncing off of the other end of the spectrum, but I've definitely calmed down so much more. I've become a lot more receptive to change, I think. So yeah, a lot of cool revelations have happened, a lot of fun growth related concepts have come in. That's been my week. I hope you've had a pretty interesting week yourself, and thank you for all the love that you had showered after last week's episode with Bookish Bulletin. We had such a cool time talking about books, and I personally loved filming that. It didn't even feel like work. It didn't even feel like it didn't feel stressful at all, honestly. And I want to come clean here and say that I was definitely very nervous before filming that. I think in general I'm very nervous before something important happens. So like the days leading up to the shooting of the episode and all of that, the days leading up to anything like presenting a presentation or doing any sort of important thing, the days leading up to it, the hours leading up to it seem so daunting and so scary and so just overwhelming. I took so many weeks to actually contact another person and say, do you want to do this and all of that stuff. I was just so I was procrastinating it for a very long time. Even though I knew I wanted to do it and I knew it would be so much fun, I was procrastinating it a lot. And I just finally, when I pushed myself and I was actually reading a book. I was reading this self-help sort of book. It's called Winning from Within. My dad actually gave it to me, I think 2 weeks ago, and I was reading that book and I was like, I have to do this. I can't put it off, there's no point putting it off. I really want to do it and it's about time I do it. So I finally mustered up the courage and I did it, and it turned out to be so much fun. And even though it was very, like for a person like me who's not very extroverted in a way, I think I like to stick to my own circle and my own people and my own books and all of that. It was so interesting to see, and I loved it, and I hope that you loved it too. And let me know if you are like this as well. Like, are you this kind of person who just gets very nervous about making conversation even with someone that they don't know? And I've been that person for a very long time. And I would really like to know if you guys are like that as well. Like, do you feel that sort of nervousness, like real nervousness, not just, jittery feeling right before you go on stage or something? It's an actual sort of nervousness that you feel all over your body. So let me know if that's you, and I would really like to hear what you do to get through it. Now, before we get into the episode, I want to talk a little bit about something. I want to tell you guys a story, okay? I want to just narrate a story, okay? And of course, I'm telling the story with prior permission and everything, but I'm not going to be mentioning the name of the person for obvious reasons. So there's this boy that I've known, okay? And I've known him for a while. He is the most extravagant person I've ever met, in the sense that literally what I just said about nerves and about being nervous and jittery about meeting new people and making conversation with them, he is the exact opposite. He's never been that person. He is really, genuinely speaking, the life of everybody. And he's been that way for as long as I've known him. Everybody who knows him would attest to that. Very, very vibrant, very appealing, very likable, very funny, very kind, and very just all the things that you would think of. He checks off all the boxes, basically. So this is a boy that I've known, and he's all of these things. And I think, I always looked at him as just those things. I thought of him as funny. I thought of him as the life of a body. I thought of him as extravagant and flamboyant and very expressive, very, very comfortable in who he was. And, he would walk into any room and make it his own. Okay? And this is him. And I think once I had the opportunity to literally just sit down and talk to him, person to person. I had never done that before. That we had only been close to each other through mutual friends and in a bigger circle, so to say. So spoke down and spoke to him one day. Sat down and spoke to him one day, and I still remember it was very vivid. We were with a lot of other people who were having a good time. I think it was a party, and everybody was just doing their own thing, talking to each other, and just having a good time. And I remember, I was speaking to this boy, and when I started asking him, I broached it a little carefully. I didn't really jump into, tell me about your personal life, who you are when all these things are not around, because that is really what I wanted to ask him. I didn't go into it immediately. I asked him about his day, I asked him about, things here and there, and we were just talking, and then I really got into it. I was just asking him about, his personal life maybe, and his family, and where he comes from, what he thinks about at night, and all of those things. There's just a conversation you have with someone you're really trying to get to know. And he asked me those questions as well, and I was answering them. And that's when he sort of sobered down a bit. And he, again, like I said, calmed himself down. He became a little bit, quieter than normal. And then that's when he started telling me about his family. And he said that he hadn't really spoken to them for a very long time. They lived in the same house, they ate the same food, they, lived within 5 feet of each other, whatever, and but he hadn't really spoken to any of them. And he said that, he loves to go to parties, he loves to meet new people, he loves to do all of these things, and when he goes back home, he just sleeps. He sleeps all the time, and when he wakes up, he comes back to college, he does all these things, and he goes back. He doesn't really speak to anyone at home. And I just, in all my naivety, I went ahead and asked him, even though I know I probably shouldn't have. I should have read the room, and I should have just left it at that, because I knew that he was a little bit, he had changed a bit, his complexion had changed a bit. He was definitely not very comfortable, but I should have left it at that, and I didn't. I asked him, what happened? What happened with your family? Why is it that, the situation is like it is? And he just took a moment, and he looked around the room. He was trying to spot a friend, or I don't know what he was trying to do, but he just looked around the room, and all he said was, I don't think they like me. And after he said that, he gave away a little chuckle, and he just smiled, and we started talking about something else. And then very soon after he left, and I went on to do my own thing, but I still remember that moment. I remember the way he said it. I remember what that seemed like, and it was just, I think the more I got to know about him later on, I realized that they just didn't approve of a lot of things that had to do with his personality. They didn't like the fact that he was not straight. He had come out to them earlier, and they didn't appreciate that. They didn't accept it. They didn't like the way he dressed. They didn't like the way he spoke sometimes. They didn't like his friends, a lot of things. So there was, a lot of things. But I think even if I didn't know all of that later part, when he said that, it sort of really shook me a little bit. And the reason I've told you this story is because it more or less connects directly to what we're reading about today, the book that we're going to be talking about today. It's called A Place for Us by Fatima Farheen Mirza. And it's an absolutely beautiful book. Fatima Farheen Mirza, by the way, is an Indian American. She lives in the US right now, and she's lived there her whole life. And she is extremely young. I think she's 30 years old, and she wrote this book in 2018. It was published in 2018, and she is very, very brilliant and gifted, and the book itself is a feat. for a debut novel. I mean, I'm gonna be very honest, I didn't go in thinking that it was gonna be such an immersive, beautiful experience, and I just wanted to read it because the blurb sounded very interesting, and also because she's I found out that Riz Ahmed got married to her and I love Riz Ahmed, so that sounds so shallow, but I'm not gonna lie to my listeners, so I'm just gonna admit it. I searched it up because I found out that Riz Ahmed got married to her. Anyway, that's not important. The book, after I read it, and once I started reading it, it just opened itself up to me, I feel, and just swallowed me whole. And the more I got into it, it kept getting me, to this place inside, just deeper and deeper, digging in, and I can't express what it meant to me. So this is the only book that I have cried while I was reading it. I have cried a lot over books. I've cried after they were done. I've cried thinking about them a day later. But this is the only book that made me cry while I was reading it. I hadn't even finished. I was reading the words, I was reading the sentences, and I was just sobbing. More about the book. So, A Place for Us is about an Indian Muslim family that's settled in California, and they are the husband and wife are originally from Hyderabad. So they get married and they are transported to the US, where they have their children. They have 3 kids, 2 girls and a boy. The girls are Hadia, Huda, and the boy is Amar. A Place for Us is primarily about this family, and the book opens with their eldest daughter. So the husband and wife are called Rafiq and Laila, and it is Rafiq and Laila's daughter's wedding. So it's Hadia, who's the eldest daughter. It's her wedding, and she's getting married to a man that she has chosen for herself, which is it's breaking tradition and it's a big thing, but she insisted, and she's getting married to this man. And the what do you say? The interesting part about that, or the thing that is piquing everyone's interest at the wedding, is that Amar has finally come back to meet his family after 3 years. 3 years ago, he had run away and nobody had heard of him after that, but he's finally come back to attend his sister's wedding. And basically in the story, what happens is that you are introduced to the story at this point, at this crucial junction. But then after that, the story kind of breaks apart, and there's fragments of memories that come back. So every chapter is basically Hadia, Huda, and Amar at some age in their life, and Rafiq and Laila trying to make sense of them, and it's their narrative. Sometimes it's Hadia's narrative, sometimes it's Amar's narrative, sometimes it's Laila's, never Huda and Rafiq's though. So they are sort of just telling their story from their own perspectives, and every chapter is just a fragment of their life and their childhood and their growing up years and all of those things, and how their relationships with each other are formed and broken apart, and what eventually leads to Amar's elopement. Yeah. What eventually leads to that. So that's basically what the story is about, and I've just given a basic premise, and I don't really want to get into more because I do not want to ruin the story for you. I don't want to spoil anything in case you're thinking about picking it up, because it is absolutely gorgeous. So I hope that you do. And a couple of things that, one thing especially that I want to talk about with respect to the book is that there is this thing, okay, in English literature especially, there is a writer called Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak. I don't know if a lot of people know about her, but she's actually written a lot. She's critiqued a lot of literature, and she's an extremely smart person. And I was reading, for my courses, I was reading one of her articles, very famous. It's called Can the Subaltern Speak? And she talks about this, this concept of the fight between theory and experience. So it's called, the theory versus experience. I can't really remember what the actual concept is called, but that's basically what it means. So what she means by theory versus experience is that essentially what you are taught and what you learn of your own accord, maybe what you learn through books, what you learn through readings, what you learn through your intelligentsia, versus what you encounter in real life, what you experience in real life. And what she's saying is that how do you weigh what is more important and what's more authentic? So in this case, in the case of A Place for Us, the struggle that the children have, and to a large extent even their parents, is that they have the theory, which is their religion in this case, in the sense that their culture, their religion, their heritage, which is being Indian and having Indian values, so to say, and also having their religion, which sets down a lot of rules and regulations and guidelines as to how to live your life. That is their theory, that determines everything that they know about the world, everything about how you're supposed to live in the world and how you're supposed to see the world. So the theory, in fact, teaches them how to see the world, but their experiences are completely different from the theory. So their experience is how they individually interact with the world. And that's the conflict that they continuously face throughout the book. For instance, I'll explain. Amar, who is you could say that he's the protagonist of the book because he takes up the most amount of screen time, book time, I don't know, narrative time, and the story kind of revolves around him. So Amar faces this conflict the most intensely, in the sense that he knows that there are certain rules and regulations that his religion, that his culture, that his heritage, that his identity that was given to him demands of him. His experiences tell him otherwise. He is stubborn by nature. He wants to explore. He has this curious mind. He likes poetry. He likes stories. He would want to do something in that field. He also doesn't know what he wants to do for a large part of the book. He's just a little confused about things, and so he faces that conflict a lot. And the others in his family, like Hadia, for example, she is the ideal child. She's listened to everything that her parents have demanded of her. She's done everything right, okay? She's gone to medical school, she's studied well, she's never gone out with her friends too late, and she's never stayed over at any of her friends' places. She's done all of these things, and she deliberately chooses theory over experience, wherein she knows that the world is different. She knows that she could be doing a lot of other things. She knows that people around her do a lot of other things, but she deliberately chooses theory because she wants to stay true to her parents. And that is where the whole mess kind of unfolds, where Amar actively tries to be his own person, be his individual self, be what he wants himself to be. And a lot of times he doesn't know what he wants himself to be, but he still is adamant that he wants live his life the way he wants to. And then there's his sisters, his parents, people in his community who have all lived their lives the way that theory demanded them to, the way that was expected of him. And he just feels this constraint. He feels so confused, and he just kind of spirals later on. So it's a very interesting thing that last week, the week before this one, we had spoken about mothers and daughters and their complex, weird relationship. And this week, we're talking about a book where the relationship between the father and the son are, it forms the just the core of the entire novel, where you are introduced to this very, very complex and heartbreaking relationship between a father and a son that honestly resembles a lot of Indian fathers and sons. In fact, all of the characters in the book are almost become cliches of the Indian immigrant family story. You know, it's a prototype that's been used so many times, but they're also not. They're also very unique in so many ways, and that is Fatima Farheen Mirza's brilliance. She takes a very cliche premise and turns it into something so gorgeous and so heartbreaking that you cannot stop. You can't help but finish the book. You can't help but be immersed and feel for the characters. You know, the premise is very, very typical. You know these stories. There's the Indian immigrant family. They're struggling with identity, all of that stuff. But you know, deeper into it, the story is more refined. The story is more homely. The story is more true and brutal and just hard hitting. So it's just, you know, when you're reading that book, I want you to really focus on this theory versus experience thing that I've just talked about, wherein what are the things that you have learned or that you are expected to do, what are the things that you are that is demanded of you by your culture, by your heritage, by the books you've read, even the stuff that you've voluntarily chosen to read and the chosen to adopt. What is that versus how do you interact with the real world? Who are you with people around you? Like how do you behave? How do you what do you want to be versus what is asked of you to be? So I just want you to keep thinking about that if you are, you know, thinking of reading that book. And again, it's brilliantly written in the sense that all of these, you know, almost mythical stories are just littered all over the book. Mythical stories from the Quran especially are just, they become perfect metaphors for what Fatima Farheen Mirza is trying to, you know, at the end of the day, she's trying to send out, the message she's trying to send out. They come together so beautifully. And again, very layered, you know. In the beginning of the book, when the perspective is just the children's mostly, you have this sort of idea of what that metaphor is supposed to mean. But then later on, that metaphor changes, and it's just so beautifully written, where, you know, even the characters, no character is black and white. All the characters are grey. All the characters have sinned, all the characters have messed up, all the characters have done something that they're not proud of. And they've also done things that they are proud of, but they have to discard because of theory. So it's so interesting to read. And again, it takes you back to a very core Indian problem that is very unique to the South Asian culture that we have, which is log kya kahenge. And the log kya kahenge thing is just everywhere. It's in every chapter, every line, every story, and you know that what happens in the end could have happened so differently if that problem wasn't present. And I know, and you know, I've thought about this a lot. You have so many movies about this. Log kya kahenge, this, that. And you know that it's wrong. You know that just, you know, stop. But where does it come from? And I realize now that it comes from this idea that Indians especially have about love, which is that love is ownership. Love is control. Love is ownership. Love is obedience. So when you obey your father, when you obey your master, when you obey your God, and mind you, most of these sources of power are phallocentric, so they're all men mostly. But when you obey these these structures, these figures, you get love in return, or you're supposed to induce love inside you. And that idea is just something that is so interesting to know, because you never hear of this concept in American stories or British stories or any other narratives. It's a very South Asian thing, very intrinsically South Asian, wherein love is sort of bartered for obedience and for control and for, favor, for goodness, goodwill. And you're just, it's the juxtaposition to that, to love as ownership, is also love as innocence, wherein you love your friends, you love whoever you choose to love out of pure innocence. And even in the book, Amar, he falls in love with a girl who he's not supposed to fall in love with, but the story that they have is so innocent and so pure and so almost childlike, and in that innocence itself, it is revolutionary. It can change. It is literally breaking all the barriers and traditions that have been set down by society and that are so rigid. But you don't even realize it, because it's just innocent young love. And that is the beauty of this whole drama that has set in. And there's this one line in the book where, Leila, she says, what do children know about love when they have sacrificed nothing? And this is something that is so integral to the book, because tradition demands that you sacrifice something for love, that a love that is true and pure is the love that you have to sacrifice yourself for. So it's that line, what's that line from the song Ranjish Shesai? It says, Mana ke mohabbat ka chupana hi hai mohabbat, which means that love is love when it is hidden, or when it is, discarded away. So the idea is always that, when you sacrifice your own needs, when you sacrifice your own personality for someone else, for love, that is love. And again, younger generation is trying to actively set that aside and be like, no, you can have your own personality, you can be your own person, you can have all of these things, you don't have to give up anything. So that's the conflict that the younger generation versus the older generation of Indians face, especially I think with the immigrant aspect. It just becomes even more complicated. So very interesting book. And the whole book, the parents are so hell-bent on discipline, on faith, on keeping the unit together, on teaching their children about goodness and about sins and about discipline and faith and all of these really strong, rigid concepts. But I'm not spoiling anything when I say that in the end, it is love that saves them. It is love that heals them. It is love that sort of conquers all. And they realize that between faith, love and hope, love always wins. Because God is love and love is God. And it's that, it reminds me of this very famous Indian mystic, a mystic who had written these two lines that are very, very potent. I think it goes something like, how does it go? Pothi par jag mua, pandit bhaya na koi, dhai akar prem ke, jo pade se pandit hoy. I might be messing up a lot of the words here and the pronunciation, but what it essentially means is that you can read all the books of knowledge, you can read all the big books, and you can read these scriptures and all of these intelligent books, but none of it will compare to this little tiny word, which essentially is love. So you could read all these books and call yourself a pandit, call yourself a really learned man, but if you don't know love, you know nothing. So I think that is what the book kind of concludes with, that love is what conquers, love is what transcends, love is the political, love is the personal, love is the divine, love is what heals, love is revolutionary. So yeah, a beautiful book about a million things, and I promise you that if this book doesn't make you cry by the end of it, you might have a problem. I'm just kidding. I really hope that you decide to pick this up, because again, beautiful book. I cried my heart out. I still, when I think about it, I'm like, it puts me in a zone. So pick it up and tell me if you've loved it, tell me if you liked it, and remember, read this book with that concept in mind, the theory versus experience concept, and let me know if you liked it. Tell me how you felt about it, and it'll be really fun to see where this leads you, and if you have some super revelations yourself. So let me know. I hope you like this episode, and I will definitely see you next time.